Let me see a show of hands. How many of y'all have been watching March Madness already? Been watching it? Yeah, a lot of people here. I really, really enjoy March Madness. There's no other athletic event, in my opinion, like it. Not the Super Bowl, World Series, NBA championship. March Madness is crazy. And one of the reasons they call it madness is because of all these teams that come out of literally nowhere with these players we've never heard of in our entire life, and they make an impact, and sometimes they go all the way to the Sweet 16, Elite 8, even the Final Four. It's quite amazing. And all these mascots I've never heard of, like the Chesapeake Bay Retrievers. Remember them from last year? This year, Liberty won. Liberty plays today. Who's Liberty? The Fighting Fundamentalists? The Second Amendment men? I mean, what is going on? So it's just crazy. I mean, March Madness is fun. And you know, it's just interesting to see these teams, these coaches, these players, kind of the least likely emerge on a major stage. And it's interesting, speaking of stages and basketball not, when we moved here, my family moved here in 1978, my little brother Cliff was 6 years old. And so, you know, you go to Sunday school before church, that's where you do it. So they were in a Sunday school class, and Cliff's sitting there, and the teacher gets up and she says, okay, boys and girls, today we're going to talk about Moses. And she goes, how many of you know who Moses is? And so only one person in the whole class, Sunday school, raised their hand, and it was Cliff, my little brother, 6 years old. And the Sunday school teacher thought to herself, oh, isn't that great? The new pastor's kid knows the answer. I'm going to call on him. And so she goes, Cliff, who is Moses? And without hesitation, Cliff said, he's the center for the Houston Rockets. No lie. No lie. So today, we're going to talk about a guy by the name of Moses. And Moses, believe it or not, is one of those guys who's a least likely. Moses is an underdog. Moses is a guy that comes out of nowhere. And we find Moses at an interesting place in his life. Moses is 40 years old. He was born and raised in Egypt, if you remember. What are you doing? Are we switching here? Is it scratching the beard? Okay, hold on a second. Here we go. I'm going to keep that on, though. All right. So Moses is, he's 40 years old right now, but if you know Moses' backstory, he was born and raised in Egypt. Do you remember his story? So his parents hid him. Moses was adopted by the Pharaoh. So Moses grew up in a fantastic home situation. He had all the money in the world, all the food in the world, all the perks in the world. He had the greatest education in the world. Moses had it going on. Now, Moses was Jewish. He was an Israelite, adopted by royalty, adopted by the Pharaoh's house himself, raised by Pharaoh's daughter. So his future was unlimited. However, his people over the past 400 years had grown, and they'd become slaves in Egypt. He didn't like that at all. So one day he was out and he saw an Egyptian taskmaster treating one of his fellow Israelites harshly. He went out and opened up a can and beat the fool out of the Egyptian, killed him, dead. So I don't care who you are. You're killing a fellow Egyptian, you murder him in cold blood, you're in trouble. So Moses left Egypt. He went hundreds of miles out of Egypt to a place called Midian, and he is working there for his father-in-law named Jethro. So he's 40 years old, he's on the lam, he's a fugitive, he's working for his father-in-law, when all of a sudden, this unlikely fugitive sees the burning bush, remember? He sees a bush burning, which is typical as he's working out on the ranch, working outside. There are all kinds of brush fires, but Moses is attentive to the small things, and he noticed that this bush is on fire, but for some reason it's not being consumed. I mean, it's crazy. So he goes and investigates what's going on in this bush that's burning, but it's not being consumed. And when he gets closer, he hears God speak to him. And here's what God says to Moses in Exodus chapter 3. Look what he says. He says, the Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I've heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I'm concerned about their suffering. So I've come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and bring them out of the land into a good and spacious land. So the Israelites who were slaves are crying out. They're screaming to God, help, for mercy. God hears their cry. I'm going to bring them to a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, God says, and I've seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now, go. I am sending you, Moses, to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. So God calls a fugitive to become a freedom fighter. He says, Moses, I want you to go back down the road, not the road to the Final Four, the road back to Egypt. You got to go back to Egypt. You got to rescue my people from slavery. I'm going to be with you. I'm going to do all kinds of miraculous signs through you. Moses, you have to do it. Now, it's interesting, if you've read the Bible just a little bit, you'll see that God frequently calls people who are least likelies. He calls people who you wouldn't predict he would call to do what he wants him to do. And to step out and to go down that road and to perform a difficult task and to embark on the hero's journey. God used a trickster, a slickster like Jacob, called him to do his bidding. God used a lady with a very checkered and troubled past like Mary Magdalene to be one of his key followers. God called a bodybuilder and strongman like Samson to do his bidding, even though he had a propensity to rebel. God calls least likelies, underdogs, people with a past, people with hang-ups, if you would, to do his bidding. What a call Moses had. What a road God was inviting him to travel down. He was inviting him to go back down the road to Egypt and then to go down a different road into this promised land, into this spacious place. We all have different callings in our life. Some of you may have been called to be a teacher. Others of you have called to be a coach. Some of you have been called to be a scientist. Some of you may receive a call to do some type of cause, to help people who are hurting, to help those who are in the inner city to get a better education and to have some tutoring, to help people who are down and out, to help people who are trapped in the clutches of addiction. And God has called you to a cause. But God is always calling us out. And we were singing earlier that great song, Jesus changes everything, and he does change everything, but we have to respond. We have to respond to what he's calling us to do. So what does Moses do when he receives this call to be a freedom fighter? Does he get on that road? What happens? Look at Exodus 3, verse 11. It says, "But Moses said to God, 'Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?' Think about this. God speaks to you audibly. God performs a miracle through this burning bush. God calls you to this task, a difficult task. Moses says, who am I? I'm not qualified. He later on goes, I don't have what it takes. I'm sure he says, God, you know about my past? You know that they want to kill me in Egypt? That's why I'm out here. That's why I'm in Belize. There are no extradition laws here. That's why I'm in this territory. They're going to kill me. Now I don't want to go back there and do that. Plus he says, I'm afraid of public speaking. I have a speech impediment. I can't do it. I don't have the skills. I'm full of guilt and shame of what's happened. They could take my own life. So Moses refuses to accept the call. We all have our excuses, don't we? We all have our excuses. We all have our past. We all have injustices done to us. We all have that, just like Moses. So when God calls us to step out into a certain career, when God calls us to step out into a cause, just like Moses, many times we come up with a long list of excuses. Now, writer Stephen Pressfield talks about this. He says that we all have two lives living inside of us. We have the life that we're living now, okay? That's you, that's me. And we have the unlived life within us. We have who we are right now. And then who we could become. And what stands between who you are and who you could be, and what stands in between the life you're living now and the unlived life within you, what stands between you is what he calls resistance. Resistance. Resistance is one of the most toxic forms and forces in the universe. Resistance is that energy that's hard to see, but we've all experienced it when we know we should do something, we know we should launch out, we know we should take this on, but resistance is there to give plenty of pushback. Resistance. Resistance is all about distracting you from what you need to be doing. Resistance is that force you see that comes off your computer screen when you know you take action and it prevents you from moving on and taking action. All you need to do is set a goal for your life, have a dream, hear a call from God, and you will meet resistance face to face. Try it on a different level. Say, hey, I'm going to start an exercise program today. You're going to face resistance. I believe I need to write a book. Oh my goodness, you're going to face resistance. I need to really get involved and volunteer and help some people I know that are hurting and crying out, just like Moses heard their cry. I'm going to do that. Resistance. Resistance is pushback. Resistance is always distracting us too. Resistance is YouTube, Instagram, Netflix binging, go have a drink, go take a nap. And resistance' favorite word. Yeah, you can do that. You can answer that call tomorrow. And then tomorrow comes and you're ready to go. You're ready to strap it on and take on that cause and answer that call. And resistance says, who are you to do that? You said you're going to do it yesterday. You're a failure. You're worthless. You're wasting oxygen here on planet Earth. What about your past? And resistance is brilliant. Resistance will pull out a VHS. How's that? They'll go VHS and even beta and pull out videos of your past, things you've done, things that were done to you, and saying, you can't be this new person. Resistance will rationalize with you, will reason with you like a skilled lawyer. Resistance. That's what Moses was facing. That's what we all face. And you know when resistance is really tough? It's when you're near the finish line. You're near the finish line. The papers are almost signed. The task has almost been achieved. The marathon's in a couple of weeks. And resistance is there to pull out all stops to prevent you from doing what you need to do. It's resistance. It's quiet in here. I'm the only person that's getting resistance? Is it? I'm getting resistance from you right now. Has one other person, yes, one other person raised it, one honest person, thank you. One person has experienced resistance in their life. Thank you very much. The rest of us are liars. So, resistance is real. Resistance is relentless. Resistance doesn't give up. Billy Graham spoke to more people in the flesh than anybody that's ever lived. He spoke to over 1 billion people in his lifetime. And when Billy would go to a country or a major city around the world, and when something didn't go wrong, when there was not some kind of pushback, Billy Graham would get worried because he knew when he went to a city, when he went to a country to do one of his massive crusades, when there was pushback, when there was resistance, he knew that the devil was up to something and that God also might be up to something. And maybe you're wondering, I don't know what my dream is. I don't know what the call is on my life or the calls I need to receive. I don't know what that is. Look at it a different way. Ask yourself, where's the resistance? Where's the resistance? Where's the fear? That's probably where the call is going to be. You see, God, He knows the possibilities that exist inside of you and inside of me. We have possibilities, we have potentialities that must be actualized. But we have to deal with the big R, resistance. Back to Moses. What did Moses do? Is Moses going to cave in to resistance? Is he going to cower back from this great call that he's had on his life? Is he going to listen to those voices? You don't measure up. You're not good enough. You don't have what it takes. Is Moses going to cave in, or is he going to face his resistance? Let's just do this. Let's skip ahead all the way to the New Testament, to Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews 11 is the hall of fame of faith. It's God's hall of fame, full of men and women who went down difficult roads and endured. And let's see if old Moses made it. Hebrews 11:24 says, by faith Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to endure ill treatment with the people of God rather than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, considering the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. Moses, what did he do? He chose the road less traveled. Boom. He chose that difficult road. He chose to go through resistance. He chose the road less traveled. What did he do? He endured. He endured. He persevered. For 40 years, he helped deliver over 1 million people from slavery, taking them through the desert, leading them to the precipice of the promised land. 40 years. Moses, whether you are Christian or Jewish or an atheist or agnostic, Moses is one of the greatest leaders who's ever walked planet Earth. Why? Because he answered the call and he was willing to stare down resistance. Not just one time, not just 2 times, probably 2 million times, as day after day after day, he endured. He stayed focused on the reward, and he discovered along the road that when God calls us into a vocation, when God calls us into a cause, when God calls us, he also empowers us. Is it a tough road? Yes. Is it an arduous road? Yes. Is it a difficult road? Yes. Is it full of resistance? Yes. But God empowers us as we go down the road of life, as we answer his call for our lives to do what he's called us to do and to become who he has designed us to become. When God calls us, he empowers us. And it's daily. It's a daily choice. That's right, it's daily. It's a daily choice to stay on the less traveled road, a daily choice to receive the grace and the power that God gives. That daily manna, that daily seeking him, that daily turning to him. Moses wasn't perfect. Moses messed up. Moses got in foul trouble, fouled out, got technical fouls, you name it. But he stayed on that road. He endured. He was focused. And he discovered when God calls, God empowers. Moses, perhaps the MVP of the Old Testament. He wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, the Pentateuch. You know, it's interesting. When we look at God and we think about our relationship with God, and we sing about this a lot, and I talk about this a lot, God's grace is real. So God is always giving to us. He's giving. He's providing. He's offered forgiveness, restoration, a connection with him. He says he will be with us like he was with Joseph. We have his presence. God is giving to us. He gives and he gives and he gives. But God also asks. He commands. He challenges us. Why? Why does he both give and ask? Because he sees and he knows what we can become. He knows what we can become when we answer his calls on our lives. I just have a feeling, call me crazy, sue me, but one day, we're going to have a chance to see God's bracketology, his brackets, his Final Four, his Sweet 16. And I have a feeling it's going to be full of men and women and young people who we don't know their names, we don't know their mascots, we don't know where they came from, but they simply answered that call. That's right. Stayed on that road and was focused on the coach, focused on Christ, who would give them that final victory. Pray with me. Father, I thank you so much that you are a God that is so patient with us. God, we need your patience. God, we thank you that you are a God that just doesn't allow us to sit around and sit on the couch and channel surf and, live looking at a rectangular piece of plastic for our entire lives. But God, you call us to something grander than that. You call us to something more difficult than that. And God, we thank you that you empower us on the way. Lord, I ask that during this time of invitation, that you would lead those who need to stand and come down front today. Some students that are here today, some singles are here today, some families and couples, they just need to stand and walk down front and say, hey, today's the day we're joining this church, or today's the day I am joining this church. And God, we give you this time of invitation to you. May they stand and come down front today as you lead, in Jesus' name.